Picture this. A young man, no older than 20, in the bustling city of Ur, stands alone in a candlelit room filled with carved wooden statues. They are gods to everyone else, but not to him. He stares at their lifeless eyes and wonders, is this truly divine? Is this all there is? He picks up a hammer. What happens next isn't just the act of a rebellious teen, it's the ignition point of one of the greatest spiritual revolutions in human history. And yet, much of this story isn't in the Bible. It's in the Talmud, in the Midrash, in the minds of sages who saw Abraham not just as a father of nations, but as a radical soul who defied his world, argued with heaven, and reshaped eternity. This is not the Abraham you thought you knew. The Torah doesn't tell us much about Abraham's early years, but the sages couldn't accept that silence. They imagined, they interpreted, and from that silence arose one of the most famous Midrashim in Jewish tradition. Abraham's father, Terach, was an idol merchant. His shop was a small yet profitable business, filled with statues of gods representing love, war, rain, crops, each one demanding offerings, attention, fear. One day, Terach had to step out, and young Abram was left in charge. Now, imagine the boy walking through that room feeling increasingly alienated. According to Genesis Rabbah 38:13, Abraham speaks to a customer. How old are you? 50 years. And you worship a statue that was made yesterday? He laughs bitterly. Then he picks up a hammer and smashes the idols, except for the largest one. He places the hammer in that statue's hands. When Terach returns, Abraham feigns innocence. The big idol did it, he says. Terach explodes. That's ridiculous! And Abraham, with devastating logic, replies, exactly. The story reveals more than cleverness. It reveals a mind unwilling to accept the world as given. Abraham questions what others bow before. That alone is revolutionary. But ideas are dangerous, especially when they threaten power. Enter Nimrod, the great king, a ruler who claims divinity, who commands armies and worship, who brooks no challenge. Midrash tells us Nimrod summoned Abraham and gave him a choice, bow to fire or be cast into it. Abraham chose the flames. Midrash Reshaped Rabbah 38:113 and Pesikta Rabbati 33 recount that Abraham was bound and thrown into a blazing furnace. The heat should have consumed him instantly, but it didn't. God, say the sages, performed a miracle. Abraham emerged alive, unsinged, even peaceful. The message? The world may burn around the truth, but it cannot burn it away. Some scholars interpret this midrash as metaphor. Abraham's survival is the endurance of faith against empire. The fire becomes the fury of kings and mobs, and Abraham becomes the still small voice of truth, standing tall where others fall. Another Talmudic image. In Bereshit Rabbah 39:1, Abraham is portrayed as a traveler who sees a beautiful palace engulfed in flames. He asks, "Is there no master of this palace?" At that moment, the owner steps out and says, "I am the master." The parable is simple and brilliant. Abraham sees the universe, majestic, ordered, and yet full of suffering and confusion. He asks the question that defines religion itself. If this world has a creator, where is he? And God responds, not with fire or thunder, but with presence, with quiet acknowledgement. This is not the faith of blind acceptance, it's the faith born of questioning. In this midrash, Abraham doesn't stumble upon belief. He reasons his way to it. He demands coherence. He demands meaning. And in doing so, the sages paint Abraham not as a follower, but as the founder of an entirely new intellectual tradition. We often think of Abraham as obedient, but the Talmud tells a different story, of a man who dares to argue with the Almighty. Genesis 18, God declares his intention to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham steps forward. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? The rabbis marvel at his boldness. In Sanhedrin 109b, they even suggest that Abraham's speech models how one must speak truth to power, even divine power. He negotiates, he pleads, he pushes, from 50 righteous men to 10. Each step a legal debate, almost Talmudic in nature. Abraham is not just praying, he's litigating. In this moment, Abraham becomes the ancestor not only of faith, but of justice. The Talmud uses this moment to highlight a key Jewish value. Justice is not handed down from heaven unquestioned. It must be examined, debated, tested, even by mortals. This Abraham is not a servant. He's a partner. The Talmud doesn't stop at grand moments. It dives deep into rituals. The covenant of circumcision, Brit Milah, is one such moment. Genesis 17 tells us Abraham was 99 when he circumcised himself. But the Talmud in Avodah Zarah 27a adds that Abraham had no guide. He used a mirror, he bled, he struggled, and then he completed the covenant. What kind of man makes such a sacrifice for a promise? This act becomes, in rabbinic thought, the foundation of Jewish identity. Abraham's body becomes the scroll on which God writes a future. And through this pain, the Talmud sees power, because revolutions demand sacrifice. Abraham's transformation wasn't abstract, it was physical, visible, permanent. Now, here's a lesser-known twist. The Torah says Abraham leaves for Canaan after Terach, his father, dies. But chronologically, Terach was still alive when Abraham departed. Why the discrepancy? The sages in Rashi on Genesis 11:32 suggest God didn't want to portray Abraham as abandoning his father. So the Torah reports Terach's death early, to preserve Abraham's honor. This detail might seem small, but it reveals a Talmudic theme. Truth and kindness are not always at odds. The moral lesson may sometimes be more important than the literal sequence of events. Abraham, then, is not just a rebel. He's a figure of enormous compassion, whose story is told in ways that highlight values, not only facts. How many tests did Abraham face? 10, according to Pirkei Avot 5:3. Each test, leaving his land, facing famine, rescuing Lot, pleading for Sodom, sacrificing Isaac, was not a punishment but a process, a sculpting of the soul. The Talmud sees in Abraham someone who didn't ask for comfort but for truth. And truth is always demanding. Beyond theology, Abraham redefined ethics. When the strangers appeared at his tent in Genesis 18, Abraham, recovering from circumcision, ran to greet them. The Talmud in Bava Metzia 86b says that this teaches us the greatness of Hachnasat Orkim, welcoming guests. What others might see as hospitality, the sages see as a cosmic value. God himself waited to speak to Abraham until after the guests were fed. Revolution isn't just smashing idols, it's feeding strangers. So who was Abraham, according to the Talmud? He was a child in an idol shop who saw through illusions. He was a man thrown into fire who didn't burn. He was a philosopher who looked at a chaotic world and insisted it had a creator. He was a prophet who argued with God, not out of arrogance, but out of love for justice. He was a father who bled for a covenant, a host who ran to serve strangers, a warrior who rescued the helpless. The Talmud doesn't just give us a biography, it gives us a challenge. What idols are we smashing? What fires must we face? And do we, like Abraham, have the courage to ask, is there no owner to this palace? And to listen for the answer? If this journey into the revolutionary soul of Abraham has sparked something in you, share this with someone who loves history, ideas, and bold questions. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the lives behind the legends. And remember, the story isn't over. Not for Abraham, and not for us. V.